Well, I think I'm going to go ahead and kick things off while folks start to trickle in. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us here for our Women Leading Regeneration live Q&A. We have Angela McElwee and Ann Armbrecht here to just open up a conversation with you all about the business of botanicals, sustainable herb sourcing, and plants as medicine. So the way we want to hold this beautiful, intimate space today is just invite anyone who has come here with a question to use the raise your hand feature to raise your hand. And Selene Diaris is our host today, and she will help moderate that, keep conversation flowing. If you don't want to chime into the conversation, but you have a question, feel free to put it in the chat. So we'll also be keeping an eye there and weaving those into the flow. Yeah, other than that, keep yourself muted, all the typical Zoom protocol that we're used to these days. But I'm really excited to hand it over to Selene to kick off this conversation. It's great to be back in community with you all.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Tay. It's a real honor for those of you who don't know who I am, I'm the founder and executive director of Regenerative Rising, and it's a real delight to have an opportunity to come back into the community. I have been on sabbatical for the last 6 months, and this is literally my first week back, and they were putting me to work very quickly. So I want to honor that I am coming from the land of the Arapaho and Lakota. And we were just talking a moment ago about the Three Sisters planting, which is a traditional very brilliant way of growing food. And it's a combination of beans, pole beans, corn, and squashes that have this beautiful synergistic relationship to grow and support each other. I'm delighted to be here with Angela, who serves on our board, and I am so grateful for all of her incredible support and guidance. I've gone through a health journey over the last year. I had breast cancer, and my team and my board and the community around this organization have been extraordinary. Jen Cates, who's within Rhythm, they jumped in and supported us. I have so many people to say thank you to for how much love and support I have had during my process. I'm healthy, I'm happy, I feel great. Cancer is a powerful teacher. I don't recommend it, but if it shows up at your door, wow, it will truly change beautiful things for you. At least that was certainly my experience. We're excited to be leaning into this beautifully crafted book by Ann Armbrecht called The Business of Botanicals, Exploring the Healing Promise of Plant Medicines in a Global Industry. And Angela has an extraordinary history of having served as the president and CEO of Gaia Herbs, one of the very high quality herb companies out there. So it is a delight to have the two of you here. And as we were saying a little before we officially began, there are a lot of folks in this room who have wisdom also to contribute. So because we have a nice size of people participating today, we want to have a more open forum of engagement. And I think, as Tay mentioned, you can raise your hand if you have a question. You can also put it in the chat if you're more comfortable doing it that way. And we will also have, so we can view all of us talking when you speak, you're going to be seen on the screen. So this is all being recorded. It will be shared later after we've done some cleanup on it. I wanted to jump in and ask a question around supply, because I think I was just in a Chipotle and they have a sign up that says we may have supply disruption So just be patient. If there's something you wanted that isn't here, that's why. And I was like, wow, that's a different world. It's a COVID, soon, hopefully post-COVID reality, but nevertheless, supply has been disrupted and continues to be in disruption for a host of reasons, as we all know. But I think, there's a chapter in the book that's called Pick a Plant. And it talks about knowing where something comes from. And I'm really curious to dive into how real is that intention to actually be able to select a plant and then literally go build a relationship so that there is a secure connection to where a plant is coming from. And, how realistic is that in the past? And particularly, do we have any intel on the now? How is that less doable? Is it more doable? Is there a trend toward more relational transactions, or remove the word transaction, more relational purchasing in the world of herbalism? So that's where I wanted to just jump in and hear some reflections from both of you, and then we'll see where the conversation goes from there.
Ann, you want to start?
No, I want you to start because I'll say I started all the work I'm doing by asking that question: can you know the people and places behind the products on the shelf? And it was around that time that Gaia started their Meet Your Herbs, launched their Meet Your Herbs initiative. And so I'm curious, which reveals some of that, but doesn't reveal all of that, and their reasons behind why I was, just as a consumer, why I couldn't know really where that plant came from.
Yeah.
And so that's why I wanted you to start, because I'm curious. It's a challenging question. I mean, I think it can be answered in a certain way if you're in a sourcing manager for a company at Gaia or Pucka or Herb Farm, where I think, yes, you can, I think, trace it. I think most companies probably don't, but it's possible. But Angela.
Yeah, well, first shout out to Greg Cumberford, who was part of the team. He's here with us, but he's part of the team who created Meet Your Herbs, alongside me and many other amazing people, some of whom are still at Gaia. But yeah, I mean, Selene, it's a foundational question, and I think it's probably part of the reason, that those of you who are joining us today are here, like how to crack that conundrum of wanting to be intimately connected to supply, but also needing to have a product that gets to market and at a certain price and on time. So how do you balance those things? And I think it is possible to a degree, especially within non-commoditized crops. I mean, it's actually Whole Foods just published their annual trends report. It was like, I don't know, 2 weeks ago or a week and a half ago, but they included 2 botanicals on that list, moringa and hibiscus. And it was interesting, they do a little write up about them, and they mention products that they're featured in, and they mentioned some brands, and it had me thinking about story as a part of sourcing. So what they didn't do is say, okay, well, hibiscus is a traditional food in Central America, and it's been used for centuries, and it has health benefits. And my mind was thinking, okay, well, I wonder if there's any women's cooperatives in Central America that grow hibiscus. And Ann, you might even know, but I think if you have a product family that has, let's say, a dozen different botanicals in it, it is possible to develop a thoughtful supply chain for all of them over time. That said, you have to start somewhere, and somewhere may be one of them. If you have 400 botanicals in your Materia Medica and you are creating a product line, then it's going to be much more challenging. It is possible. And I think even the best companies are struggling with the herb business. Like many others, there's a lot of purchasing that happens through brokers, where you'll go to a broker and that broker will act as the middleman, and you won't have any sense of, who grew that or what the conditions were. That it's certified organic, that it comes from this country. You get a C of A. That's about it. If you want a story, or you want a connection, or you want to go beyond a certification like fair trade or Demeter or organic or even rock, then it's a direct trade relationship that you need to cultivate, and those take more time. They definitely require some tenacity, because you're working often with smaller family farms who may not have the systems to do what you're used to with a broker. So anyway, I'll pause there, and I'm sure you can add your perspective. You spent a lot of time with those farmers.
Well, and I wasn't looking at it from a company point of view. So what did strike me, though, in speaking with people at companies who did work through, say, a much larger ingredient supplier, is that they would, as part of their relationship, ask to be able to do site visits. And so that they're not handling all of the logistical challenges of importing from around the world, but they do still have the ability to visit. And that was, so the example of pick a plant was from Joseph Brinkman, and in the early days, that was kind of what he helped make possible, seeing beyond that kind of veil of ingredient supplier. I think by and large, it's only a handful of companies that do that. One thing, when I was traveling in India with Sebastian Pohl and Ben Heron from Paka, they talked a lot about how they make a point of having a variety of different supply partners, so that there are some smallholders, and those do require much more investment and time and visiting for all of those quality control kind of issues to work out. But then they also source from much larger farms, or where that quality is more of an assured thing. But it was their way of balancing that social economic criteria, really addressing those issues as well.
I appreciate what you both share, because it seems to me, it's a resource intensive proposition to be able to have the luxury of that level of relationship building. It would cost money to travel, and all of those other elements. So I guess if you're a smaller business and you're sourcing herbal ingredients, what's some counsel around how to navigate that landscape, so that you may have a higher probability of still feeling really confident that you're getting really beautiful materials to work with?
It's an interesting, so I think if you're small, like let's say under 500,000 in revenue a year, for businesses that are around that size, maybe a little bigger, you can usually source from a regional farm. So you could find a farm partner who was regional, and you could probably buy a couple of crops from them. What I've seen in my work over the last year with, talking to people who are scaling brands, is that frequently it's the brands that are sort of in between. They don't have a sourcing department, so they can't develop the kind of robust supply chain network that, companies like Paka have the luxury of doing. But they're too big for these regional growers who can't sell them their entire crop. So I think if you're still sort of artisanal and small, like that feels like the easier, but then when you scale, that can't scale with you. So you have to sort of reinvent that. Lauren Hayes here from Wooden Spoon Herbs, which, if you don't know that brand, it's a beautiful brand. And Lauren is the founder and fearless leader of that brand. And she definitely I think could speak to that as well.
That's part of her actual journey. Cool. Well, I would love for her to throw in as we sort of shift from here. I have one more question that I wanted to ask you all before I surrender to the group. I've been thinking a lot. I've seen a lot of posts recently about from Indigenous communities asking for people to honor and not harvest certain types of plants that are very important to their traditions. Sage, white sage being one in particular. Like I saw something that this time of year, particularly in California, is an important growing season for that herb. And so they're asking people to please not go harvest because they're disrupting the plant cycle. So there's a lot of things like that. Slippery elm comes to mind, and there's some other more like wild crafted herbs, some of which, because of climate change and disruption in land itself, I would imagine there is some risk of we may lose things if we are not really being mindful. Is there a framework in the community that helps oversee or guide these choices and actions on the part of folks in the industry, or is it left to the ethics of an individual company or person?
That's a great question. Anne, you want to share your perspective?
Well, I'm curious what you think, but I'd say it's left to the ethics of a particular company. I mean, there are organizations out there like Traffic and Fair Wild or United Plant Savers that are trying to this is around wild harvested plants, that are raising awareness of the plants that are at risk and have resources, both for companies who want to go as far as getting Fair Wild certification or do kind of assessments around the impacts of the harvest, but that's all voluntary. And I last year I'm trying to do these plant profiles, doing what you were saying, Selene, about following a plant, and it's quite hard to find information. And I was doing it with black cohosh, and so I went on Amazon and I picked like 12 brands, and I emailed them and I asked, "Oh, where's your black cohosh from?" And I'd say 8 out of 12 said, "Oh, it's cultivated," and like 95 to 97% of black cohosh comes from the wild in Appalachia. And so I wrote back and I said, "Oh, really? Where is it cultivated?" And they said, "Oh, we can't reveal that information," or they just didn't respond. And so it's to the companies, but it's also to the people who use the herbs to know if this is wild harvested or not. It gets back to seeing behind the product and where the ecosystem from which things come, and knowing, things. Even cultivated plants, how, this is a regenerative practice, how are they being grown? How's the soil cared for? There's no ethical framework for that. It's up to us to ask questions and up to companies to lead the way. And I'll add one more thing. We were just in Germany 2 weeks ago at Martin Bauer, which is the biggest botanical ingredient supplier in the world. And we were there to do a short video on their commitment to climate. To go zero by 2030. And it's the woman we were speaking with is the 4th generation in this family. And she was talking about how her children are stakeholders. And I thought, we always, hear a lot about 7th generation and needing to think of our children and grandchildren. And people often speak of that as a motivating force for doing good now. But what struck me was literally the work she does now to care for the impacts of their sourcing is literally going to make her kids' job easier. And that it brought it home in a different, more immediate way. But Angela, that's what I'll say. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think for brands, there are trusted sources that you can go to, and United Plant Savers is one of them, American Botanical Council and Sustainable Herbs Project. These are sources that if you wanted that information, you could find it through them. And they do, there are advisories like around golden seal, or, there's a lot of conversation happening around chaga right now with the rise of medicinal mushrooms. And, chaga takes a very, very long time to mature and grow, and it's wild harvested. And at this point it's being over harvested. And so I think that it is up to the individual company. And the challenging part for companies is that consumers may not know. Even the best meaning consumer, is like, okay, I want to buy this. Like, where can I find it? And they may not understand that scarcity is related to an intentional choice. I mean, I know some of the people on this call, I for sure have made decisions to reformulate products based on some of these ethical questions, and probably lost revenue as a result.
I'm glad I asked that question, because I've wondered it a lot myself, and it's challenging to realize how much of the onus continues to rest on the shoulders of the consumer, and how do we ever transmit enough information that people are actually aware of some of these more at-risk plants and how to navigate. And of course, then relying on businesses to make the right choice for the long term is also, that's a up for grabs moment too. So sounds like everything in the human condition, it's just not any different in the world of herbs. I wanted to open the floor to the rest of the room. I think what we had determined, we were going to try to have folks raise their hand and ask a question. And so I wanted to make that invitation. And I guess, Tay, are you going to be able to see? Oh, here's a question in the chat. So I will just ask this on Greg's behalf. Is it a question? Yes. So many small to middle-sized botanical companies rely on herbal ingredient distributors who serve as a supply hub. Are some distributors stepping up on supply chain transparency and sustainability? And can they be brought into alignment with protecting eco-social values? Excellent question. Thoughts? Do we know?
Martin Bauer is an interesting example, I think, because, yes, they're a behemoth in terms of the herbal world and, the supply chain. They're also really striving to create good in their catalog of products. And, and we had a conversation with them a couple of months ago, I think for the International Herb Symposium. And what struck me was, their team shared on that the portion of their catalog, which represents like regenerative and sort of the best in class of all of the ESG measures, is the lowest performing. It's not, they don't get velocity on it. They really try and sort of promote that and talk about it and educate, but they are not seeing traction in that part of their catalog. So it was really interesting, because I'm like, gosh, what a struggle, because they're trying to do the right thing, and they have the they're so huge that doing the right thing there really creates a ripple that is meaningful. So, I mean, I think from a brand perspective, what I've seen more of is cooperatives and cooperatives sort of banding together and finding an NGO locally, and then finding a way to bridge the worlds and bring a product to market. Less about distributors. It's hard for, I really respect what they're doing, Martin Bauer, because it's hard for distributors to, to pivot. Sort of direct trade is the antithesis of what they've done. So I haven't seen that yet, but I'm, Ann and others, if you guys are seeing that, it's a good question.
I want to invite Lauren to share. I will say, add one thing. So at the Sustainable Herbs program, we have been hosting this series of conversations with member organizations, so donors of the Sustainable Herbs program, which include brands, ingredient suppliers, producer groups from the Sudan, India, Central America, to Greg, really try and have a conversation. You know, these are all people who have supported sustainable herbs programs, so have some interest in, you know, alignment with eco-social values. And then to have a series of conversations around, okay, what are the key points, issues, leverage points, and how can we cooperate, you know, come together around specific actions. And the last session we did a mapping of the current reality and then the future reality. And one ingredient supplier, one of the things in his map was far fewer ingredients and much more focus on quality rather than quantity. And he said, you know, our whole business model is kind of the more that we can source, the more we can sell, and that's how we generate revenue. And so, you know, I'm curious to see what he then makes of that shift to just that insight of less can be more, you know, when your model is based on more. Lauren, as an herb company, that I'm curious, I'd love to hear your experience with sourcing and
yeah, hi. Thanks so much for the invitation. I'm happy to be here, and I'm just so grateful to hear all of y'all's insights and just be in community. But I don't know what I have to add beyond what you guys have already talked about. Essentially, when I started Wooden Spoon, one of my main drivers was creating a supply chain and an economy and supporting the economy for domestic herb farmers. And I started at the farmers market soliciting with a list of herbs and saying, have you seen these herbs? Can you grow these herbs for me? And that was successful. But then as we outgrew that, it went to regional and then just finally like nationwide. Anything we source domestically has been through now our co-packer or or through suppliers like Mountain Rose, who I trust. Well, that's not true. We've sourced things directly from India a couple of times anyways, but with the supply chain that I really want as our sourcing for quality, potency, just low carbon footprint, all of the reasons, it was very easy at a small scale because I was sourcing from Oshala and Gentle Harmony, these like very direct consumer amounts, you know, a pound or 5 pounds maybe. But as we've scaled, it's been really, really challenging because we don't have the forecasting. We don't have the teams on the ops sides. We don't have that forecasting to say, okay, we're going to contract grow, you know, 100 pounds of nettle, and we're going to use that up in 2 years. And when we have tried to do that, it's been like, maybe it works, maybe it doesn't, maybe we're still growing into it. But I just recently went and did a sourcing trip in Southern Oregon, kind of the hub of herbal industry, it seems, you know, Vermont and Southern Oregon. And it was amazing because I really realized for the first time, it's something that we can kind of grow back into. So right now we're looking to bring on ops support so we can grow back into that kind of supply chain, but it has been this bumpy middle growing pains kind of place that we've been in. So I can 100% relate to that. But thinking about the future, it's very encouraging to tailor our growth plan to growing back into that sourcing. And like you guys said, choosing to use fewer ingredients, but higher quality. Totally.
Thank you, Lauren. That's so appreciated. One question I have for all of you is, you know, like the role of storytelling feels important to me around creating that sense of value exchange. So on the customer side, there's some opportunity to start to have a comprehension of some of the things we've just begun talking about in this forum around, you know, how do you know what you're getting is what you want to be getting from a supply side? How do you know that there is a eco-social value, as Greg Mintz called it, which I really love that phrase, around your larger constellation of care? How does storytelling from the brand perspective come into creating that understanding to your customer base?
Is this a question for me or for everyone?
Well, I mean, you're welcome to answer it, and Angela and Ann, of course, as well.
You guys take me off of here. I'm done.
You're like, I didn't sign up for a live panel this morning. I'm just having fun.
This is y'all's
Well, I think Tay has to work that magic.
I think on the storytelling front, you know, so our kids go to Waldorf school, and the 6-year-old in Waldorf tradition, they start to learn to read in 1st grade, but they really don't read until 3rd. And the way this was explained to us is that when you look back at human development, like thousands of years, humans always had ways to communicate with each other that centered on story.
Mhm.
And so we're wired this way. Like, I mean, this is just as animals, like we're wired to tell stories and relate through stories, and numbers and like those sort of sharp angular curves, and even some of the the written letters are very foreign. And so having children learn them in ways that they can relate to story actually really help them. But I think understanding sort of how humans make decisions and helps us understand, okay, well, like how do we connect to people? I think it's hard, even though we know that our climate is in crisis. I've found that even really intelligent, amazing people can sometimes just like completely glaze over when they're, especially when there's a decision to be made that potentially is, okay, there's revenue at risk or margin, and I have to make this decision because it's the right thing for my children's children.
Right.
Like, stop talking to me about this. I think stories are a way that feel they're more relatable, and it doesn't even have to be about a specific person. It can be the story of a town who their tradition is to grow this, and so there's lots of ways to do that. Diaspora, the herb company or the spice company,
Yes.
she talks about decolonizing the spice trade. What she's building is incredible, and it's all through storytelling. When you order her products and you order her spices, you get a little card that shows, here's the market price of saffron, here's the Fair for Life or certified fair wage, and then here's what they pay, and it's like 5 to 7x usually of what the market price is. And you understand really through the relationality of, oh wow, what was I buying before? And how did that person live who harvested it? And I think it's incredibly important. And I think that that's unique to each brand. It's not a cookie cutter, like you have to do it in a way that's unique to the soul of your brand and your company and your product, which is what makes it so special.
It's an interesting question, because I'm an anthropologist and it's all about telling stories. And as a buyer of products, I am so suspicious of stories that brands are going to tell me. And yet, diaspora stories have I think maybe it's the directness of the storytelling, whereas, some brands that are doing amazing work are more polished. And so the stories feel like they're produced in a marketing department for a purpose to convince me of their goodness. And I tell a story in my book about when I had the first time I visited some Fair Wild certified projects in Eastern Poland and traveled around with a wild harvester who was collecting nettles or something. And it was wonderful and remarkable. And then I came home a month later and I was in our local co-op, and there was a box of Gypsy Cold Care tea, which I noticed on the side of the box said something about Fair Wild. And I read the packaging, and I've bought traditional medicinals tea before, and I never read the packaging because for the reason, I don't really trust the packaging. I trust the product. But this was a story about the wild collectors in Poland. And I realized it was probably that wild collector who had harvested the plants that were in that box of tea, which was a remarkable connection that was much more powerful than a story necessarily of that farmer. But stories in a way are the way we have access to that. So I don't know, I think yes to the power of stories, but not all stories are the same.
They're not created equal, as it were. It's like
it's authenticity. It can't feel like it's marketing copy. I mean, it loses, you just like tune out.
Yeah.
Well, you used the word soul earlier, Angela, and sort of talking about a brand or company. And I think when you're talking about a smaller, nuanced environment, I mean, I think what Gaia Herbs did with Meet Your Herb was a really extraordinary initiative for a much larger business to offer that experience to the consumer. And I imagine you guys did a lot to educate people on issues that they might never have considered or even thought they wanted to know by having that as an option.
Yeah, interestingly, I was just talking to somebody about this. Well, what Gaia did, and Greg could chime in on this, but Gaia was a company that grew herbs and made great products, and didn't really care about the marketing of it so much. And then we thought, okay, well, let's do a better job of helping people understand how to use these, and making them appealing to a larger audience of people. And what the team did at that time was look at what we already did. So it wasn't like, okay, how can we create this program? It was like, wait, we're already doing all of this. Like, this is what we do already. So let's tell people that we do this. And I think that's part of the reason that worked. And there was, a lot of questions at that time, like, what if we share a supplier and somebody like steals the supplier, like, I mean, fair questions if you're running a business. What if somebody like goes to them and buys our supply? And so I think, what we learned was, look, the more the merrier. If someone can share in complete transparency where they get something or who their source is or how it's tested or when it was harvested, like, let them do it. Because for herbs, like what we learned at that time, and I think it hasn't shifted, even though that was like almost 12 years ago at this point, people want to know, do these herbs work and are they safe?
Mm-hmm.
And it's probably pretty similar still.
We have
Go
ahead.
Can I ask a quick follow-up question on that? I'm curious, what are the ways you think or ripple effects you saw from the Meet Your Herbs outside of Gaia?
Well, one interesting thing that we learned was that at first we thought it wasn't working. And even actually every marketing leader who came in would look at the numbers, the click-throughs and heat mapping on the website and say, well, this isn't working. Like, no one's actually tracking and putting in the number, because, there's a number and you put it in and then you see the, all the traceability. What we learned was that because we told people they could do it, they trusted that they could, and like 95% of them didn't, which is kind of frustrating, because you're like, wait a minute, man, we did this. Like, but I think the ripple was one, like, that's a slippery slope. You want people to be empowered and actually go and look and, be educated consumers about everything, their food, the water they drink, their herbs. But it did lead to some really good conversations in the industry. And there's still, I think it's still sort of the only of its kind, but there are companies who are really striving to have that type of traceability and transparency in their supply chain.
Well, I have to say, guilty of that behavior as a consumer, because it does have a sort of assurance, the fact that that information is accessible, it ups your trust level.
Yeah.
So I'm one of those people who's like, yay, I'm so glad I can know that.
But I don't need to know it.
But because that's there, I won't even go take the time.
Greg, since you were part of that, is there anything you would add? Not to put you
can
on the
you hear me?
spot. Yeah.
You can hear me? Okay. Yeah, I would just add one point, because I was definitely there building the database that made that transparency real. And I think even though the actual utilization by consumers or practitioners was low, I think it had a really galvanizing effect because it showed that it's possible to do. And it raised across the entire spectrum of stakeholders, from consumers to practitioners to supply chain stakeholders that got the questionnaires that we were sending them. Wow, this is happening. And so I think maybe the more sort of resonant metric around it is that a company with, literally hundreds of SKUs and probably that north of 1,000 ingredients could do this with a fair degree of depth and integrity, means that, well, really anybody could do this if they cared. And so I think that has been a ripple effect, far beyond the metrics around utilization of the tool, the functional tool. And I think it did reset expectations that have led to a lot of the kinds of initiatives that we're seeing now, and that smaller companies with simpler supply sourcing and not as vast a portfolio of ingredients or products can do.
I think that's a powerful point that you just made, Greg, that if a company of that size with that number of ingredients can do that effort, then it really makes the argument that that's an impossibility, obviously a false claim. So that it's a really beautiful thing to have set into motion for the industry at large. I wanted to honor that there's did either of you have anything further you wanted to comment on that? Because I wanted to honor, there's a question. So Rod has said, I work with growers as a distribution hub, more food than herbs, but there are two skill sets, farming and marketing. We try to do the messaging, but struggle with this one step removed from the farmer, but the farmers just want to get better at growing, which is a lot for them to focus on. Any advice on creating that soulful authenticity? And I think this is around the storytelling, like how to, and Rod, if you want to say anything additionally from just that frame I read of your question, you're welcome to say something more.
Sure, yeah. I just was really struck by the fact that, we're busy trying to do some good storytelling, but I think we do land in we're all just a little cynical because we know we've been lied to for so long. The greenwashing, is a real thing. And so, I'm just curious. And Greg, I liked what you had put in the chat there as well, just about the local storytelling. I think that's super. I feel like that's part of the answer to kind of what I'm looking for. But would love to hear your thoughts or advice around that. How do you get that soulful? And I guess maybe the context, our farmers have all kind of adopted regenerative ag practices. And so that's a complex endeavor in itself. And so they want to get better at doing that. And so the storytelling and the marketing of their products is not necessarily on the top of their list, because the climate emergency is saying, no, we need to get better at this and get more farmers growing in this way. And so, curious how to kind of create that sense of, you come to this hub and you actually begin to trust it.
Thank you, Rod. And then we'll go to Alicia next.
The hardest, I think the two hardest things for brands or distributors to establish, one, authentically caring. If you don't authentically, if you're like, okay, well, this is a great angle, I think I'll go this direction. That's different than authentically caring. And Rod, what you just shared is you really, you have some standards around the type of curated mix of food ingredients and, you know, farm partners that you've created. So you care. And then I think too, is like figuring out, okay, well, how does that show up in your product? And it sounds like you've identified like regenerative ag principles as part of what defines and sets you apart. I mean, I don't think there's one way, but like what came to mind as you were sharing, and I'm sure there's lots of other, you know, great suggestions, but especially if you're bioregional and farms are in a similar geography, is to hire an amazing photographer and have them come and take some photos on all of these partner farms, and, you know, figure out how to make the economics of that work for everyone, for you, for the farmers. The farmers can use these in their materials, and find a copywriter who can tell some stories. Like celebrating the farmer as hero, I think is very underrated. And look, we wouldn't eat without them. You know, soil has the potential to save our planet at this point, and farmers are on the forefront of that. So that's what comes up first for me.
I had a couple of thoughts. One, Greg, I like what you're saying about moving beyond pharmaceutical stories. And I think a lot of, you know, so much of the botanical industry is focused on wellness, like this product is going to do this for my health. And what I've been trying to think about is how to shift that story so that by taking this product, we're enhancing the wellness of communities, ecosystem, you know, and that spiraling out ecological medicine kind of framework, which Greg, you're talking about in your product. And so like ways that stories link, not just so that there's this underlying veiled manipulative by this product because it's so good, but how by buying this product, I am protecting or supporting these decisions that are having these impacts in these communities. And so kind of shifting, and that makes me think also Raymond Williams, a literary theorist, talks about side effects, how we don't see the side effects of our ways of living. And so this is shifting that in a positive way. Like, what are the positive side effects of this for the earth, for communities, of this product? And another thing is Seth Godin, I think that's how you say his name, he's a marketer, has these short little blog posts and that are quite insightful about storytelling. And he had one recently about attention, and what often, like when I read stories that are written, you know, for marketing purposes, it's what they think I should pay attention to. And he's saying what matters is what you're paying attention to. Like, so Rod, what your farmers are paying attention to, or what you as holding that hub are paying attention to. And there's a fantastic skincare company, Laurel Skincare, who has a quite active and engaged Instagram following. And I was asking her for advice because Instagram overwhelms me. And she said the posts that get the most likes are when she shares her personal struggles, questions, stories. She's super committed to the producers of their products, of the botanicals, and why she cares. That's what gets people to respond. Those are my. Beautiful. But I also want to say, you know, that's exactly why I wrote this book, The Business of Botanicals, to try and talk about stories and really ground it in story. And it's not a bestseller, I'll tell you. So I just got my royalty check and it's very small.
Don't forget, if you don't have it,
go buy it.
Go buy it. Support this work. It's really important. Alicia, I wanted to welcome you to ask your question.
Thank you so much. It's such a pleasure and an honor to be here with you all and just hear all this amazing information. I was curious, I'm wondering, how is current public policy helping or hindering the industry?
Public policy, Alicia, like specific to farming or growing, or is there or just in general?
It's kind of just in general, and I'm just wondering, you know, are the changes or the policies that are needed or you know, hurting the industry, are they coming from at a federal level, at a state level, locally? I'm just kind of wondering. I know that there has, you know, everybody's talking about climate change and it drastically affects this industry, but I'm just wondering, are there like specific policies that the industry is working on, whether it's to, kind of push back on or further if it's helping. I'm just kind of wondering what is, how public policy plays a part in growing these, your business and furthering, the education of consumers and businesses.
Ann, you want to speak to that? I'm curious if that's come up in your with the leaders in the space that you're talking to.
Well, it's a great question, and I think it's I won't say a lot. I want to hear what you say, but my take on the FDA and things like that is, while they can have a positive impact on quality, they're also making it challenging for smaller companies. And so it's requiring a scaling up because of testing, that's more details that are needed here that make it harder to source directly from smaller farms because of lots. And you need to do a lot of testing on different lots. And so it makes sense to go to a bigger supplier, which, has also the different consequences we've talked about. I know Mega Food I've talked to Bethany Davis a lot about efforts she's made to really get some policy moving around supporting regenerative practices or more awareness. I think it's not a lot is happening, but Angela.
Yeah, no, I would agree with the not a lot is happening. I mean, I think that there are a group of brands and leaders and people within the industry who care deeply about regenerative principles, whether you're growing, grain or herbs or, raising animals for food or, any of these elements of what this community is part of. The regulatory framework to support that is largely absent. And, that is incredibly challenging. I was just talking to a group of smaller brands who all share regenerative commitments and who are sourcing directly. And I realized that they were sourcing directly from some of the same geographies and connected them and put them on a call together. And they started discovering that they had feet on the ground and places where they each needed feet on the ground. And it has me thinking, in the absence of, Alicia, to your question, there's just not a framework that makes it easy for brands to, okay, well, here's how you would consider yourself to be making strides toward regenerative agriculture or improving the health of your soil, or these are not things that our governing framework is supporting. I think it's really up to brands and organizations to seek out like-minded, collaborative, inclined folks. And like Bronner's, the Bronner's team does a really great job at that. I'm sure you guys saw they're making a chocolate bar now. And, people who know Bronner's is the soap that has all the words on it are like, what the heck? Why would they do that? And for them, it's about supply chain and it's about regenerative and really it's about saving the planet. They can do that through any crop. And so they, had a supply chain that needed to be essentially, made sustainable by monetizing it and supporting the farmers. And why not? So, yeah, Alicia, I think it's a really good question. There's, APA, American Herbal Products Association, is sort of the lobbyist portion of the herbal industry. And they'll do things like if there's a labeling law that is going to subject manufacturers to some really onerous change, they'll come together, they'll go to Washington, they'll lobby. They're really effective at that. I think, though, the missing piece is well, how does that relate to supply chain and storytelling and authenticity and integrity of product? These pieces aren't in place.
I want to just throw in, thank you both for your responding to Alicia's question. Alicia, thank you for bringing that into the forum. We have just a few moments left, and I did want to share through the Americans, let's see, what are they called? The
American Sustainable Business Council.
There's an initiative right now as part of the Build Back Better budget that's for $27 billion for the USDA's conservation programs. And this is like an unbelievable amount of support for conservation. And ultimately, this is going to be towards regenerative initiatives. So I've put something in the chat for those of you who want to just take a look at that. It is currently a live, active moment legislatively. And so this is an initiative if you want to, take some action on something that could put an enormous amount of resource into the farm system specific to, it has a lot of provisions that are also for BIPOC farmers, et cetera, et cetera. So it's not precisely on alignment with what you were asking, Alicia, but it's kind of in relationship to some changes on how things are happening on the ground that could be very impactful in a good way. So we have just a few, I'm sorry, what?
I was going to say, thank you so much. I'm going to look into that.
Oh, great. Good. We just have a few moments left. And I think what I'd like to offer is just for Ann and Angela to just make some closing statements, kind of wrapping in a bow some of the topics we've touched on in our conversation today with any last wisdom you'd like to share. And I want to just thank you again so much for being a part of Regenerative Rising's Q&A with Angela and Ann.
You want to wrap the bow first?
Well, I'm terrible at wrapping and I don't have a bow.
I mean,
but
the pressure. Well,
total pressure.
I just, I really appreciate the care of the community of, the natural products community, whether it's the farmers or, the makers, of any size, large, small, I appreciate the thoughtfulness and the striving. Like, I think, the intention is a big part of like creating change, and there's an appetite for change, like that keeps showing up, and that's what creates innovation too. I mean, our industry is ready for innovation and disruption, especially, helping people discover their farmer and create a relationship to their food or their herbs. So keep at it, you guys.
That was a lovely bow. Well, I want to just say how honored I am to be part of this conversation with Regenerative Rising, because I feel like of any things I've kind of dipped into and listened to, the work you all are doing is rooted in, like, I think it can't just be sort of the botanical industry. It has to be rooted in like relationships and the quality. What does that mean? What is a regenerative relationship? What does that feel like? What does that look like? And then it expands from that. It starts, so it's also how we care for the soil, but it's, what Angela, you were saying when we spoke before, it's not extractive. It's how are we feeding the system? How are we feeding each other? How are we feeding the communities that are feeding us through their products? And I feel like the conversations and the conferences I've listened, you all are having those conversations. And so thank you for offering that. Yeah.
You're welcome. I feel like, part of, I think the most important activation for all of us is to recognize the gift of caring is really the best guide for each of us in how we lead our lives, how we make decisions, is to come from a place of caring not only for ourselves and our family, but that multiple generational idea, but also these other things that we're nested inside of our community, the landscape, the watershed, the other creatures that we share this planet with. I think caring is an amazing capacity that we all have, and to let that become a larger part of how we show up can only lead to good things.
Awesome.
Well,
Yeah.
Thank you so much, everyone, for being a part of our gathering today. It's been a real honor to be here with Angela and Ann and all of you. And Tay, thank you for always doing such an incredible job of orchestration and keeping me on track. So I deeply appreciate it. So blessings to all of you. Take good care. Be informed people in your communities, and just help us all continue to do what we do with greater shared accomplishment.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Take
Thank
care.
you, everyone.
Bye.